Hi, Brianna. How are you?
Doing well in yourself?
Oh, I'm trying. I'm trying to survive. Are you, did you go home for Thanksgiving? Are you home right now?
I'm home right now. Yes.
Aw. Yeah. How is it seeing your family again?
It's nice. I got a quarantine though, just to be on the safe side.
You're so responsible. We had
Oh.
kind of a scare with uh, a couple of like friends of ours that were in the bubble. My daughter's friend went maskless around one of her cousins who just returned from college. And of course, a couple of days later, she came down with COVID and we're like, oh, like,
Yeah. So
so,
yeah, I got COVID tested a couple of days ago just to be sure.
oh my God, you're like the best person
So
ever.
if I do get positive, I'm gonna be so sad.
Yeah, well, but how responsible of you, because I know so many just in my immediate circle, their college kids are coming home and they're not doing a whole lot to keep their family members safe. And
Well, I'm maskless around my roommates and I don't know what they do outside. So if I
no,
get
no,
it,
you're
I'm
the
just like, I don't
best.
want them.
No, I just want to tell you that I'm really, hi Zoe. Um, I'm just really impressed because I mean that says a lot about you. Says a lot about you. And I know it has to be hard not wanting to, be around other people and hug them and stuff, but
Yeah, I can't even hug my parents right now. So this is depressing.
yeah, yeah. I feel the same way with my mom. I haven't hugged her in about 3 or 4 weeks, and she's like, I just miss being touched, like she hasn't had anyone touch her for, you know what I mean? Like she's in this home where there's an outbreak of COVID right now, and so nobody's
Oh,
really, yeah, it's just sad times. How are you, Zoe? How are you, Pauline? How are you, Yana?
I'm good. I just traveled home, so this is like my first day back with my family, so it's a little overwhelming, but here we are.
How's your family doing? Are they?
Yeah, they're good. When they picked me up in the airport, they were like, "No, we can hug you. We have COVID, blah blah blah." And then now they're like, "Okay, we'll hug you." Like it's a little weird because they don't know like what happened on the plane and all that. But
Yeah. There's been all kinds of, yeah, we feel like we're back. Oh, they're the twins.
Hey.
We're just talking about how tricky it is getting back into our family life, not knowing if you have COVID, trying to be back with your family, but not totally back with your family. But I'm guessing the two of you're not back in Brazil, right? So you're still here?
No, unfortunately not this year.
Oh,
How was
my
Thanksgiving
God.
for you guys?
Yeah, how was Thanksgiving, everybody?
It was good. It was good for us.
yeah,
We ate a lot of sweet potato with marshmallow, so that was really good.
Well, there you go. That's Thanksgiving in America. Done and done. That's hilarious. Yeah, it's really sweet, isn't it? Sweet potatoes with marshmallows. It's sort of like,
It's so
Yeah,
good.
You have to have a cup of water beside
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can have one or the other. I can either have sweet potatoes with marshmallow or pie, but I can't have both.
What's your favorite pie?
I everything. I mean, pie is pie. I don't know. I really love pumpkin pie if it's really whipped really well and it's really light and fluffy. With like homemade whipped cream, because I make my own whipped cream and it's so good. So my kids really like that. But we also love chocolate pie too, like the real good.
Oh, I
chocolate
haven't had chocolate pie. Interesting.
Oh my God. If there weren't, I swear, if there weren't COVID, I would have the two of you over and I'd make you
Wow.
the chocolate pie you've ever had.
She had chocolate pie.
Really?
Wow,
Oh,
that's
it's
interesting.
So good.
I like pecan
Oh
pie.
yes, that's my favorite.
That's really good.
That's my husband's favorite.
Yeah.
But I think it's just so he can go around and say pecan pie. Like,
Have you guys had mincemeat pie?
that's a British thing, right?
I think so.
I have
think
not.
so.
I've not had mincemeat pie. Anybody else?
Do you know what it is?
I mean, yeah, because I watched the Great British Bake Off show.
Wow. So it's basically ground beef and apples and sugar, and we tried it like a couple months ago, and we did not like it.
No, I mean, it doesn't sound good to me. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
pie is supposed to be sweet. You don't put meat in it.
Yes,
I mean,
yes, yes,
like,
yes.
that's my line. You know? It's like, ugh, no. Mm-mm. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. So did you guys hang out with American friends? Did you go somewhere?
So because we're staying with two volunteers from ISF, International Student Fellowship, and organization on campus, and so we just stay with their family and their grandkids. It was very
So
nice.
cool. That's so cool. Well, good. I'm glad you were taken care of. I was thinking
Yeah.
that's good. It's good. All right. So I want to begin this discussion because we haven't had a Zoom in a long time. Our Zoom was not, now that my kids are back in school, I can Zoom to my heart's content. I don't have to worry about the Wi-Fi going all screwy. That being said, we haven't really met for this novel yet. So any questions, any comments, any confusions that we want to clear up right away? Like, I want you all to lead this discussion as much as possible. What are you thinking about the novel so far, especially in conjunction with the other novels? Like, I know that it's heavier than the other novels. It's like a lot of information. So how are you doing with the reading? Do you have any questions, concerns, comments, confusions, like anything? Just want to throw it out there.
I just wanted to say that this is the only, the first two books I was already familiar with, and this was the one book that I didn't really know much about. And going into it, you expect it to be like solely about Cal and like his growth, all of that. But I have to say, honestly, the most interesting part of the story for me is like about his grandparents and about his family line, and like reading about Lefty and Desdemona's relationship is like super interesting. And I think like the full circle aspect of the novel is really interesting and
Zoe,
makes it interesting to
because
read.
that's the opposite reaction that most of my students have. They're like, oh, I don't want to read about, American history or, immigration and everything. So why do you think Eugenides does this? Because his other novels are equally as beautiful, but they're much shorter and much more compact. So it's interesting to me why he takes this novel and he blows up the story and he has that kind of full circle and he brings in the, why do you think he does that? So, I mean, if
Well,
and climb into his head.
Yeah, and one line that really stuck out to me, and it's towards the very beginning of the book, but he's talking about the differences between like female and male writings and how females like tend to write in this circular kind of way, which is like how I feel like the book is written. So there's that, and I've thought about that line like while I'm reading ever since.
Yeah, there's a feminine circularity, he says, to my writing. Yeah. And do you all agree with it that this is a quote unquote feminine way of writing or a feminine way of understanding ourselves as people? That we're part of like a community, that we're part of a line, that it's not just this straight chronological order, because this book doesn't go in a straight chronological order. It's like boom, boom, boom. So even time itself is not seen as this like masculine, straight chronological line, but one that is the past and the present all inform the future, right? So it's all boom, 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 layered and connected. And again, for some people, they're just like, they're used to the straight chronological order of a narrative. So how about the rest of you? How are you reacting to that?
I really like the way he wrote. So like his writing style, I think is really good.
Oh, nice. Good. I love it too. But again, it's not for everybody. So what do you like about it?
I like because he starts talking about something and then he stops and starts talking about something else. And also like he's very descriptive and I like that.
Yeah.
I can really imagine when he writes.
I like the sly humor everywhere. You know how there's just like the sly little bits of humor, because this could be such a serious story. This could be such a gloomy story, but there's all these like little sly bits of humor. The characters, you can tell he loves them, even though they're messed up, like, again, the way he approaches his grandparents, I think is really interesting. As a person in her 40s, there's something that happens when you're 40, when you're in your middle age life, because I know that I have lived more than I will in the future, my days are much more numbered than yours are. I mean, none of us knows how long we have, but sometimes that keeps me up at night about 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, you know, like there's no way I'm gonna live to 96. So like whatever I want to get done, I need to get done, you know? There's a sense of urgency, but then also my sense of self. I've become a lot more interested in my mom's stories, a lot more interested in my grandmother's stories, a lot more interested to know kind of where I come from. And that there's this urge too to pass it down to my children, to my daughters. Like this is like who you are is not just this little blip in this time and space, right? That who you are is actually an extension of all of this. And what I think is really, really fascinating is that he keeps playing with this line between fate and chance and whether or not we are a product because we were supposed to be, we're meant to be, or whether this is all a happy accident. And I swear, like even just think about all the different historical things that had to happen for Bianca and Bruna to be here, you know? Like, think about all the things that, you know, if there weren't a potato famine, I wouldn't be here, you know, because my great-great-great-grandfather wouldn't have come over to America from Ireland if there hadn't been such poor economic conditions in his country. And if my grandparents hadn't gone to that same Christian picnic, you know, out in upper Missouri, I wouldn't be here. And if my parents hadn't had this sort of, you know, gone to the same dance, I wouldn't be here. You know, if Wilco hadn't come, my favorite band, and played on May 5th, Charlotte wouldn't be here, my daughter, I'm sure of it, you know, because that's what inspired me, you know, like when you think about that, it's like, holy crap, you know, like, are we here because we're meant to be? Or is it like, think about all the historical things that had to have happened for us all to be sitting here on the Zoom call with each other. It's like mind bending to me. And he keeps playing with this. Was he meant to be? Was all of this happening so that Cal could be here? Or is this just all happenstance? And which one gives us a richer sense of who we are? I don't know. I mean, I think that's up for debate. Which one's a more kind of beautiful idea? Which one is a more fascinating idea for you two, for all of us? And that's what this novel is really playing for. So I think Zoe, not only is he a character as an intersex person, that's important, right? But I think it's just as a human being, think of all the things that had to happen for him to exist, right? And as an intersex person, how can we look at all of that and say that was a mistake? That somehow he's a mistake, or that he's an error, or that he's somehow wrong. You know what I mean? So there's that question too. Yeah, I just think it's such a beautiful novel and such a beautiful way of thinking about ourselves. So I want to throw this out to all of you. I'm grading your test and putting those grades in and everything else. Most of you did great. If you still want an extra credit possibility, then one thing I'm going to throw out to the class, and this is due like next Friday, the end of all possible times. If you want to interview your parents, interview your grandparents if they're still alive. Some of you might even have great-great-grandparents, and just ask them the moment that they either fell in love or thought this is the person I could be with, or the moment that they knew that they wanted to have children. I mean, does that make sense? Like, try to investigate your own realization of the self and how fragile that is, That, I mean, especially Bruna and Bianca, because I'm an identical twin too. You know, that's like a 1 in a billion thing happen. Like, it doesn't, the identical twin, an egg that's fertilized and then breaks off is a total fluke of nature. There is no rhyme or reason for when that happens. And so that, I mean, right? So you know, if you want to do that, if you want to investigate, you can, by Bianca and Bruna, you could Skype with your family members, or FaceTime or Zoom or whatever. Pauline, are your grandparents still alive, Pauline? No, okay. Do you know if the story of their meeting, of how they met?
I think my mom will probably know, and my dad, so I can just ask them about it. Yeah. Okay,
and see, because they might be like, oh, but at least that.
Yeah, I'll ask.
Seriously, start to record these stories, you know, because this is a part of who you are. This is how you came to be, that moment, you know, right or wrong, I look back at the letters that my dad used to write my mom, and he's an economist. And I still go, why did the two of them end up together? They were not happily married, by the way, they divorced. But you read the letter, he would begin his letters to my mom, counting down the seconds they were going to be together in 1,300,552 seconds. Like, oh my God, like the least romantic man in the world, I was like, Mom, couldn't you tell that? Because she said that. She said, girls, you make sure that you have sex with your fiance before you get married. She's a Catholic woman, by the way. Because if I had sex with your father before we got married, there's no way we would have, I was like, okay, thanks, Mom. Thanks for that information, So I guess it's a good thing she didn't, because she's a good girl, good Catholic girl, because I wouldn't be here otherwise. All right, that was a long introduction. Let's get to the questions. And anytime you have any questions, you want to jump in, please do so. So the questions that I have for today, and I think for me, it's really, really, really interesting. Some of you have already written on the discussion board. I think Bianca and Bruna, I read yours. Zoe, I read yours. So the first question is, Dr. Luce, how do you guys respond to his pronouncement that she's just a girl whose clitoris was merely larger than those of other girls? And then how does she react to him? So I'm going to combine question number 1 and 3 together. First, do you think it's fair that Callie says that Dr. Luce lied to them? Do you think that's true, that he lied? Or do you think that he told the parents as much as the parents were able to process? And then why does Callie react the way she does? So how about if we first talk about Dr. Luce? Do you think Dr. Luce lied to them all? Do you think that that's true? Is Calliope at all complicit in his diagnosis of her gender identity? He tells the parents this, right, on page 427 to 428. The simplest way to put it is like this. Callie's a girl who has a little too much male hormone. We want to correct that. Is this adequate? Just about all Tess and Milk could handle? Misleading? How do you see Dr. Luce? Favorably, not so much, and why? And Zoe, I know that you had a lot of really great reactions to this, that you did not think that Dr. Luce was a doctor of integrity right here. Do you want to explain a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the most shocking part to me was that, and I get that, I mean, it was what? I think she was 14, and I get that it's like normal to talk to the parents first, but I was shocked that he didn't even like consult Callie before he met with Tessie and Milton.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, you assume that he's worked with like all kinds of people, he's seen all kinds of cases. And I feel like going in to any like exam like that, where you're collecting evidence that you can't exactly prove. So, Callie could say these things. It doesn't necessarily mean that she did them. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like you would have to know, like, okay, there's a small chance that this isn't true. So I shouldn't base like this entire decision off of it. And I just thought, I mean, it was a fair assumption that her parents wouldn't react well if he went the opposite direction. Cal obviously thought that. That's why he ran away. But I don't feel like that was Dr. Luce's place to make that decision. You present them with all of the information, and then it's up to them to handle that information.
I mean, even that file, they never saw that file, right? So the file that he had collected, all that information about Callie's condition, he did not share that with them. He didn't even tell them that chromosomally speaking, Callie was XY, not XX, which might have played a part. It might have changed their ideas about Callie's gender identification. What about the rest of you? What did you think about Dr. Luce? Do you think that he was lying? Do you think he was just telling them as much as they could handle?
I think he was telling him the truth, but not the whole truth.
Good.
So like, I understand that Callie is Cal, but his parents have been raising Callie as a girl since day one.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming that he believed that if he would have told them Callie's a boy, like everything they know about Callie is wrong, and they wouldn't know what to do. I don't think Milton and Tessie would accept Callie to be a girl. So it's saying that that Callie has too much male hormones is like an easier acceptance than saying your daughter's a boy. You
Right.
just raised her the wrong way.
XY. Because like being a boy or girl, he was one of, Dr. Money, this is based off as, was one of the first sexologists that said gender is a lot more than just chromosomal status, right? And he's right, because right now, Callie is not, is Callie unhappy being a girl? Can anyone find any evidence that Callie right now is unhappy being a girl?
Yeah, I would say that she's self-conscious with her body, saying that I guess she wants to be normal. I guess that's my thing. She wants to know who she is. She wants to be normal.
Right. So in some ways, Callie is confused by the mechanism of her body. She knows that whatever her crocus is, she calls it her crocus, is probably not, because she's seen another naked girl, right? She's seen the object, so she knows that she's built a little bit differently. She had sex sort of with Jerome and knows that she's not built, she knows that something is off about her body. So you're absolutely right. But as far as functioning in society as a girl, I don't see her having any problems. I don't see her thinking, man, I really think I'm a dude. The only time she comes close is when she enters the body of Rex, right? During sex with the object, that felt natural to her. When she became like the guy in the sexual position. And think about even her interactions with the object. She was very much the person who initiated that sexual contact. And in many ways, I don't want to say male or female, but she was kind of masculine. Does that make sense, everybody? Kind of took the quote unquote masculine role in those sexual encounters. If we say masculine is to be the one who initiates sex. And notice I'm saying masculine, not male, because I think that, you can be a female and initiate sex. That's not unheard of. Ask my husband. But this idea of, her Callie taking at least in the bedroom, a more masculine position. She was usually on top, right? She was the one that initiated. She was the one who was a little bit more persistent than the object when it came to sexual contact. So, and Bianca, I think it was you or Bruna, one of you talked about how it was that part of her life, that sexual pleasure of her body, that kept her from staying. Do you want to explain why that seemed to be so important to her?
So it was me, and I think I don't remember what page I put it in my response, but like I think it's when Cal is on the motel.
Oh, I think it, wait.
Yes, and then like he's just experimenting with his body, and then he talks about this sexual like desire that he was feeling, and that when he starts to doubt everything that he chose, he thinks of this of his part. And then because it was something like he is young, and he was just starting to know what it was all about. So I think that when he discovered that he was not gonna have the sexual pleasure, he got scared, and he didn't want to lose that.
Yeah, and think about that's something else that Dr. Luce did not tell either Callie or Callie's parents, that this operation to make her clitoris more like other women's clitorises would effectively, possibly, potentially wipe out erotic feeling. And think about that. We've talked about like female genital mutilation in The Color Purple. Does that make sense? Like that is a part of your body that's really important. The Color Purple is all about, Celie was a virgin until she had an orgasm. Does that make sense? Like sexual pleasure, Shug says God wants us to have sexual pleasure. Sexual pleasure should not be seen as like this dirty, wrong thing, that this is an incredibly important part of who we are as people. Think again about Milton and Tess. Why does she pick Milton? Because he's kind of he turns her, he turns her on. Let's be frank about it. Tessie's a really good girl. She's kind of a prude, but Milt, with his, instrument of choice, turned her on, and we can't discount that, right? In terms of like why we settle with the people we settle with. Why? Because it's that sexual connection. And just think, if Callie had not met the object, if Callie had not had, knew that she and the object, because no matter how we think of the object initially during those sexual encounters, obviously the object was enjoying them too, because they started to infiltrate their waking hours, right? That's how they got caught by Jerome. That, Callie and the object were falling in love. And it was in part because of that intense sexual pleasure they were feeling with each other. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah,
And
so I think that like many,
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I just think that, there were many reasons that made Cal leave and run away, but I think that this one was a really big one.
And I think you're absolutely right, because I get the sense, I don't know how many of you do too, but why then, let me throw this out. Couldn't Cal have stayed with Tess and Milton and said, I am a guy, look at the file, because he says that in the letter he leaves his parents, right? I'm a boy. Ask Dr. Luce, I'm a boy, right? Why did he have to leave? Why couldn't he have stayed and said, I want to be Cal now and function in society as a guy? Why do you think Cal felt like he had to leave?
I think their parents wouldn't want that. I think their parents would have tried to steer Callie to stay Callie, because when the doctors told him that Callie's a girl with a little bit too much male hormone, you could see in Milton's eyes that he was relieved. Tessie was happy, and when they came home, they're all happy and go lucky. They went out to dinner. So if Callie would have said, I want to be a boy, that would have just put a damp on their whole mood. I don't think that's what the parents wanted. So,
Yeah. I think you're right. Any other evidence that we have that Cal felt like maybe he wouldn't be strong enough in the face of such resistance? If that makes sense.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you can go.
Oh, I was gonna say basically when Cal looked up the definition of what, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Hermaphrodite?
Yes. So basically when he looked up the definition and basically how it also had a synonym for like monster, I feel like he just wouldn't be accepted like in his neighborhood or where he was already located at, because everybody knew him to be a girl. So like I think he like all of us, I feel like we could relate of like not wanting to be judged, or like fear of being judged, not fitting into society. So I feel like it was just more so of him, as well as not like letting his parents down, but also him having to face like being judged for the rest of his life if he was to stay where he was already known to be a girl.
And let's think about, this was 1974. We're 2020. And
yeah, that was another thing too that I was going to bring into context, because like even today we still like have people that struggle with being targeted by people that are homophobic. So there's no telling what could have happened to Callie if he chose to stay and people found out like what he actually was.
Yeah. And I can imagine, because I think that's part of the reason why Callie initially just sort of wants to get it over with, right? Like she wants the problems of her body solved. And even though she went to the library and she knew that there was something different about her body, at first she was willing to accept it, because it would make her life easier, it'd make her parents' life easier. She'd already functioned in society as a girl. She wasn't unhappy in society as a girl. But it, you know, as Bianca points out, on the bottom of her file, it talked about taking away the parts of her body that gave her sexual pleasure. And that's, I think that was the line she didn't want to cross, you know what I mean? Status, that she was beginning to understand that there was something, that her condition was a lot more complicated than Luce was projecting. Luce was just simplifying it for everybody, right? And she kind of knew. Zoe, did you want to climb in to the conversation?
Yeah, I thought a lot about Tessie and Milton, and especially Milton. I mean, they want to fit in so badly, right? Like they go to the suburbs, they buy this typical, you know, white suburban home. They're living the American dream. I mean, especially Milton tries his best to leave all of his culture and heritage behind and assimilate to American life. And I think Hal feels like it would just be like too embarrassing for them. Like they wouldn't be able to handle it. They would stick out in their neighborhood. They would stick out in, you know, the town, and which, like, I kind of agree with him. Like I think they would react like that. I think they want to be normal just as much as Allie wanted to be normal when she was young.
Yeah. And so I think this is so brilliant because you're coming full circle. You started off by saying how you really loved how we're getting in depth into not only Cal's life, but his father's life and his mother's life and his grandparents' life. And we can see Milton, you know, that he has, like you said, he's wanted to be a white American, somebody who thinks they're white, right? That's what Ta-Nehisi Coates says in Between the World and Me, which is a brilliant, brilliant book. You should all read it. And in it, he says that, you know, most of the people in America who think they're white, they only think they're white, that most of us at some point or another, and I know my, you know, ancestors did, they weren't seen as white. Irish Catholics were not whites when they first came over to America. You know, Eastern Europeans were not whites when they first came over to America. Maybe a couple generations later, their ancestors, you know, we think were white. But, you know, white really is, you know, in terms of American culture, we can see those levels of resistance to Milton being seen as a typical American, right? Like at first he had the, you know, he wasn't going to be able to buy that house. If he didn't have cash on hand, he wouldn't have been able to live in that middle-class neighborhood. Just like the Jewish family, like they had to buy the house with cash too. And by the way, my mom was a real estate agent in the 80s. And when I asked her about this, the point system, she's like, oh yeah, we used it all the time. And I was like, oh, she didn't even think of it as racist. You know, she didn't think of it as racist or classist at all. She was like, well, it just makes sense that people would want to be around their own people. Okay. So she wouldn't even think about showing an Indian family or a Black family or a Greek American family. She wouldn't even think about showing them classic houses in white neighborhoods. Remember, the internet didn't exist at this time. So the only way you would know that houses are for sale is if you looked in the newspaper or went through an agent. And very typically, you know, a Black family would come up and say, oh, we want to look in this neighborhood in that house. I'm like, oh, it's already sold, you know? It hadn't been, but that's what they would tell families. And again, she's just sort of was completely oblivious that there was anything wrong with this practice. And I was like, okay, like, all right, I'm just gonna move on, Mom. So this idea then of Milton, I think, Zoe, you're absolutely right. There's so much evidence that he would have had, I think, even a harder time than Tess. And Tess would have had a hard time because she wanted a daughter so badly, right? But Milton would have had a particularly really difficult time in accepting anything wrong or abnormal. And he was the first to just kind of jump on the doctors. Oh, okay, well then, this is an easy problem, it's a fix. I believe in the medical society, I'm gonna listen to the doctors, they're the authority, done and done. Like, problem, fixed, done. I think he would have had a hard time with the messiness of having an intersex child, because it's messy. Yeah, nice, nice, nice. All right, let's take a look at some of the other questions. So we talk about, like, in many ways, I can see Cal struggle with some of my daughter's friends who identify as trans right now. And And when it talks about, for example, this transformation from female to male, let's talk about if there are any point in that transformation that you thought was interesting or maybe scary. For me, it was like, I couldn't help but I kind of identify with trans kids who have to go to use the public restroom, for example. And that they, on the outside, they're presenting as one gender, but are forced to, in some states and some schools, to use the bathroom of their quote unquote genetic, whatever that means, birth, sex. And that just the squeamishness, the kind of scariness of Cal traveling alone as a 14-year-old intersex child. What did you guys think was interesting as he was transforming from female to male? What did you think about that? How does Eugenides, the author, describe this transformation?
Yeah, I definitely think that, you know, starting to use the men's restroom, you know, I think that Cal had a very hard time with that because like there is a part on page 452 where he talks that, you know, when he was still in school, like he would act all funny about it because, you know, he was, you know, behaving in society as a girl, and now he had to act differently about it.
Yeah, yeah. And also just that it was so much grosser than the women's bathroom, which is totally
Yeah, you know, that must be so hard.
I know. I just thought it was very interesting because it says my girlfriends and I had a comical opinion of them. We hid our guilty interest by giggling or pretending disgust, and now he, you know, he had to use the men's
And
bathroom.
also because I think Cal had like, you know, the expectation that the male genitalia would be a certain way. But then when he would go to the bathroom, he compares it as dry tuber snail that had lost its shell.
yeah, and
Sorry.
Oh, go for it.
You never really think about like, I mean, I never really thought about like the difference in like bathroom culture, like bathroom etiquette between like men's bathrooms and females or women's bathrooms. Because you think about like women's bathrooms literally everywhere you go. At least in my experience, it's honestly kind of like a friendly place. Like there's so many stories like drunk girls at bars in the bathroom, you know, you make friends, like you're complimenting each other. And like sometimes it's gross, but like it still feels like a place to go. But like Cal was describing like how different like culture and the that like no one talked to each other and like you're kind of like embarrassed about it and it's like silence, like get it done.
I mean,
yeah, also that, oh sorry.
No, go.
I think that it was also hard for Cal because, you know, like for us girls, it's common, you know, for us to go to bathroom together and just like Zoe was saying, talk, and there's that support. So, and then the men's, like he writes in the book, is very different. Like it's very individualistic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's also, I've asked my husband about this, like, isn't it weird when you just walk up to a guy and you guys are both peeing at a urinal? Like, to me, that's really bizarre. Like, and he's like, you just, there's this code. You don't look at each other. You don't look at each other's junk. You just do your thing. I'm like, that's so weird. But he says, if you don't do that, if you go to the stall, then the assumption is you have to poop.
Exactly.
And it's also kind of like, you know, there's kind of like a sketch. If you just hear some guy peeing in the stall, you're like, what's going on? Why are they peeing in the stall? You know, why aren't they here displaying their manhood for everybody? So for Cal, it has to be especially sort of anxious because he has to use the stall because the opening for his very small penis is on the underside. He can't use a urinal. He has to pee like a, you know, sitting down. And so for him, there must be like that added step of anxiety because he's peeing in a way that isn't like all the other men who pee, you know? And Zoe, you just reminded me of your comment about, you know, bathrooms are kind of a safe space for women. That's where in The Handmaid's Tale, you know, Offred and Mora were able to talk, right? Like even at, Jezebel's, they were able to go to the bathrooms. That's where they had their female community. So yeah, you're right. It's like a completely different culture, and he misses it. He misses, you can tell, even as he's transitioning to a male, he misses being a girl, which is really interesting to me. I wonder.
Can I just say something really quick? No, I just think that, when Cal cut his hair was also very significant. And I also talk about that in my discussion board, because it is so true, because I used to have very, very long hair. And when I cut my hair, I felt like, I really resonated with how Cal felt.
Yeah. Yeah. When I got this haircut, I was sort of like, oh, yeah. It's like you become a different person. He compares it to breaking up, right? This is on page 445, right after he gets his haircut. I opened my eyes, and in the mirror, I didn't see myself. Not the Mona Lisa with the enigmatic smile any longer, not the shy girl with the tangled black hair in her face, but instead her fraternal twin brother. With the screen of my hair removed, the recent changes in my face were far more evident. My jaw looked squarer, broader, my neck thicker with the bulge of an Adam's apple in the center. It was unquestionably a male face, but the feelings inside that boy were still a girl's. To cut off your hair after a breakup was a feminine reaction. It was a way to start over, to renounce vanity, to spite love. I knew that I would never see the object again. Despite bigger problems, greater worries, it was heartbreak that seized me when I first saw my male face in the mirror. I thought, it's over. By cutting off my hair, I was punishing myself for loving someone so much. I was trying to be stronger, And so here's Calliope / Cal. He's transitioning to being a male, but I just want to emphasize that for Cal, this, again, it's not like he wanted or felt more comfortable acting the role of a man. And I think what this novel really does is showing us how much of our gender performances are performance. Does that make sense? And just think for a while, for a day, just try to, he tries to walk like a man, and he's realizing you don't walk with your hips as much, you walk with your shoulders. And you don't look at your shoe like this, you bring it up like this, that there's all these different ways you're supposed to walk and hold yourself, and your voice, and the tilt of your head, and the sound of your voice. If you don't ask a lot of questions, you don't end your sentences with right? That there are so many signals, again, that we learn from the very beginning that clue us into certain performances that we're supposed to enact. And what I think is funny on page 449 is that some of these behaviors, the very fact that it was so artificial made it real, which I know is a paradox, but just bear with me. It says, like a convert to a new religion, I overdid it at first. Somewhere near Gary, Indiana, I adopted a swagger. I rarely smiled. My expression throughout Illinois was the Clint Eastwood squint, which I think is hilarious. It was all a bluff, but so was it on most men. We were all walking around squinting at each other. My swagger wasn't that different from what lots of adolescent boys put on, trying to be manly. For that reason, it was convincing. Its very falseness made it credible. Now and then, I fell out of character. Feeling something stuck to the bottom of my shoe, I kicked up my heel and looked back over my shoulder to see what it was, rather than crossing my leg in front of me and twisting up my shoe. I picked correct change from open palm instead of my trouser pocket. Such slips made me panic, but needlessly. No one noticed. I was aided by that. As a rule, people don't notice much. So this transformation in some ways was difficult, in some ways wasn't, because so much of what we do is kind of an act anyway, especially young boys trying to be manly, trying to be real men. I thought that was really really interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that I really like about this book is that, Cal has a very unique perspective, because he had the opportunity that most people don't get to identify as both a male and a female, and to fulfill both of those gender roles. And, well, obviously he does identify with one more than the other, but there are aspects of each and, specific gender roles of each gender that he identifies with more than the other. There are certain aspects of femininity that he identifies with more than masculinity. And it just like makes you think how nice it would be if you could adopt traits and characteristics and roles based on what you felt fit you and worked best for you rather than like what fit your gender.
Amen. Yeah. And also how sometimes what we're asked to do in order to fit into gender norms is to ignore our very humanity, or at least parts of our humanity, right? And not possibly tap into them, so that women are asked not to tap into their anger, which will fester in not so great ways, and men are asked to not tap into their perhaps sadness or grief, which ends up sometimes tragically. Does that make sense, everybody? That in order to fulfill sort of these gender identifications and these gender performances, that sometimes we're asked to, not fully enjoy and fully examine and fully like participate in what it means to be a human being and all the kind of spectrum of emotions and spectrums of sexual feelings and spectrums of whatever, and Zoe, I think you're right. It can be kind of sad. He does have that opportunity. I wonder, Zoe, sometimes, honestly, if he had been allowed to keep his body, if he would have been okay staying as a female. If that had been a possibility where he could be sort of more, like we would say now, like a more of a sort of a binary, a non-binary gender identification, where he's, like intersex, if that were a possibility in our culture. It is in some cultures, right? You can identify as intersex. Because we've been talking about how Dr. Luce never gave Cal the choice. Well, if Cal's condition had been discovered when he was a baby, he wouldn't have gotten that choice either. At the time, right? And even now, a lot of intersex babies, the parents decide what quote unquote gender that baby's going to identify with. And as I've mentioned before, sometimes that ends up very, very tragically, because adolescence comes, as it does for all of us. And many of these children who are raised to perform certain gender roles suddenly find themselves identifying more as another gender. And that's confusing and it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this earlier, but like in his adolescence, Callie never really expresses that she, like herself, not influenced by outside factors, not influenced by, how other females in her life present themselves, but she never really expresses that like she would feel more comfortable as a man. It's that she feels that her expression of femininity isn't enough and it's not like good enough for the people around her. So I think it's a really interesting question to pose. Like, you'd just been given the choice to stay as she was, would be enough.
Right. But I also think that, as she said, there's that really great quote about being normal, and this is on page 446. I had miscalculated with Luce. I thought that after talking to me, he would decide that I was normal and leave me alone. But I was beginning to understand something about normality. Normality wasn't normal. It couldn't be. If normality were normal, everybody could leave it alone. They could sit back and let normality manifest itself. But people, and especially doctors, had doubts about normality. They weren't sure normality was up to the job. And so they felt inclined to give it a boost. Like if she had just said, look, this is who I am and it's normal, I think she's right. I think Cal knew that he couldn't go back to Luce, that Luce would want to, they would want to change his body somehow,
Yeah, I also, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna also say too, like, I think Callie also was starting to feel like she was more like an experiment to Dr. Luce as well.
Yes. Yes, and I think Zoe talked about this in her discussion board, this idea that Luce saw Callie more as an example that would help solidify his own theory that the gender you were raised as is more important to your gender identity than, say, chromosomal status. That was his little niche in that sexology world. And here he stumbled upon this kid who seemed to embody his very theory. And the fact that when, that Kelly decides to become Cal sort of blew that up, and so Dr. Luce also had an ulterior motive to want to keep Callie as Callie, right, Zoe? Mm-hmm. And change her body and cut off certain parts to make her, quote unquote, look as much as a girl physically as possible. And as Callie says, like, nobody was looking at her body and looking at her and thinking she's fine just the way she is. That everybody had sort of a stake in trying to change it or manipulate it or fix it somehow. Fix it as if her body and her was a problem. And I think everybody is right that if she had stayed, then they would have tried to fix her. And so in some ways becoming and identifying as a man is one way to sort of keep them from trying to fix a problem of her body.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Okay, so just going off of a little bit of what Kelly said. So Dr. Luce, he would ask Kelly all the questions, and some of them she lied about them, right? About her sexual attraction and everything. So, I also think about this normality. So, if she had gone back to Dr. Luce, like maybe the theory that he would be proving would be wrong, because everything that he was writing down was not all true.
Right. And why does he believe it's true so easily, Zoe? Maybe because it fit in nicely with his theory. And why would he push back and really try to examine to see if she was lying? Because it's
I feel like that's one of the really dangerous things about, I mean, it's applicable to areas that aren't just the medical field, but when you go in to this case study, whatever, and you have a preconceived opinion,
right?
You want to prove that. You don't actually want to help the patient. And if Callie were to say, tell him what he didn't want to hear instead of what he wanted to hear, he would have been disappointed when, your reaction to a child like opening up to you like that, it should be anything but disappointment. But he would have been disappointed that his theory was being proved wrong. For him, it was less about helping Callie, I feel like, and more about like advancing himself.
Absolutely. And we can kind of see that too, about her body being seen as like a medical experiment in Brianna, because, she talks about being laid out on a table and he would have other men come in and examine and lift and measure. And, so her body was like this, medical thing. So I feel like my heart just breaks for her at this point in the novel, right? Because she feels like she's a monster, because that's what the dictionary is telling her. And she feels like she's this medicalized body that needs to be fixed, on one hand. And as Bruna and Bianca are saying, like the way she comes to her, comes to his, it's so hard to use pronouns, right? Because we have the binary pronouns. It's really hard in this situation. But when Cal is in that hotel room and he's exploring his body and he's having that pleasure, then that's one way where he's trying to heal himself, right? And trying to identify with his body again in some sort of natural, beautiful way. And I think it's interesting. I hope you don't write this in your student evaluations of the courses, but I do think it's interesting that the two of our novels, at least, focus on masturbation and sexual pleasure as a way for people to understand themselves and their sexuality. It's really interesting to me. All right, so any other insights that you want to bring to the table? Any other questions that you have?
I have to be really careful of what I say because I already finished the book. So no.
Oh, yes. Yeah. We don't want to give away too much. It is a beautiful ending, I think.
Yes.
I do have a
Sorry.
question. Oh, well, it's not about the book. I had a question about like the not the final exam, but for the paper. I don't know if I was reading it correctly. So did we have an option of what type of assignment we do, either the paper or you said something else?
That's right. If you want to be creative and not write a paper and do some kind of creative project instead, please do. Because it can be such a wonderful experience to create something, you know. I've had students who've done amazing work, and they're not all artists, you know, but they've done amazing work. And I'll give you a quick example of a project that, you know, it's still an interpretation. So I had this amazing, you know, a student with amazing artistic abilities, but all she did was she took a movie still of the color purple and painted it. I was like, what you're doing is interpreting Steven Spielberg's interpreting, you know what I mean? Like, that's not really an interpretation. But I had another student whose artistic skills maybe wasn't of the highest caliber, but what she did was she drew painted a picture of the color purple and emphasized the color purple, emphasized the importance of sexuality, put a bunch of quotes from the novel and interlaced them in the fields of flowers, so that when Shug was talking to Celia about God and about sexuality and about all those feelings, it was interwoven in the flowers themselves. And then on the flip side, she did the same thing, but for Calliope in the novel of Middlesex, because of the crocus and the flowers. So what she was doing is connecting sex with nature. And this really kind of beautiful, and it was really interesting because it was like a triple text. So it was like all part of the same picture, but really trying to show all this emphasis on sexuality being natural and a part of being a person and a part of being spiritual. And it was really cool. It was a really great interpretation. I could see her analysis of the novel through visual interpretation. Does that make sense, everybody? It was really awesome. I've had students who've done music before. I have students who've done photography before. I've had students, and it can be really fulfilling. So Brianna, if you want to go in that direction, please do. Please feel, even creative writing. I've had students write poems as a response. I've had students who have written the novel, like maybe a short chapter from the perspective of a character we don't usually hear from. So maybe Desdemona writes a chapter. Maybe, you know, Tess writes a chapter. Maybe Milton writes a chapter. And instead of Cal being the speaker, you get into the head of one of these other side characters. You can take this in so many different directions. So if you're like kind of fatigued with writing, then there are other ways of interpreting literature, in my opinion.
So I kind of was thinking about for when you were talking about basically, like, I was thinking about writing a poem, but writing a poem from like a mother's perspective of her child being intersex.
Yeah.
Instead of Callie's perspective, because we kind of got to see a lot in the book about Callie's perspective. So I wanted to like do something about like the mother.
About the ending, but Brianna, when you read the end of this novel, I think you will have an even better interpretation about Tess.
Okay.
I think what you're thinking about doing, especially if you write like a poem to my child and the speaker is Tess, there's going to be a lot of great fodder for that by the end of this novel. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that idea. I like that idea a lot.
I have two questions really quick.
Yeah.
My first one, I know you mentioned that if we couldn't attend this Zoom meeting today, you were going to have another one on Thursday. Is that going to be like different from today? So if we were here today, but we wanted to.
It'll be over the last part of the novel. But of course, I'll open it up to any questions or concerns. So any other part comes in. But that will be for that I was just trying to do it at different times because I know everybody's schedule is really wacky. So if people, you can still make the 3 o'clock on Thursday. We'll be talking about completely other things.
Okay, cool. And then my second question was, if we are interested in doing like a creative interpretation, do we have to, oh gosh, what's that word? Like proof it with you before?
It would be great. I just, last semester I had a student who did a creative project, and it was just talking to his grandparents about history stuff. It wasn't even about their relation. It was, can I just be honest? It was obviously a paper for a different class. And he was like, well, there, you know, and I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. It has to be on the novel. You know, it has to be on something we've discussed. Sorry, you can't just like go totally rogue. So I just throw that in there. And also sometimes I'll ask very pointed questions like, okay, so what's your interpretation? Is there something from the novel that you're really thinking about? So that I can make sure that students aren't gonna turn in, not that you would, Zoe, because you're amazing, but you know, not just turn in a piece of paper with a smiley face that says, I like this book, you know? Hopefully it's a little bit deeper than that. So
then if we do the creative project, then if I read it correctly, we have to write, you know, a paragraph or so explaining.
Usually my students want to do that, just because sometimes, you know, especially if they're like, I don't know if my artistic skills, you know, like I had a vision in my head and it didn't quite come out, but this is what I was aiming for, if that makes sense. And also it's just one last time for you to be able to make sure that I see what you wanted me to see, because art can be so subjective. And also to point out specific quotes or specific parts of the novel that really inspired you to start this project, because then that really, really helps me see the connection, the analysis of the novel itself and the interpretation you're taking. Sometimes a student will hand something and I'm like, this is really beautiful, but I don't see the connection. So that's your chance to show the connection. It doesn't have to be super long. Some of my students, I mean, it ends up being a 2-page because they get really into it. That's fine too. You don't have to limit yourself to a paragraph, but some kind of explanation is usually really helpful for me.
Okay, thank you.
It doesn't have to be really formal. Does that make sense? It does not have to be very formal. It can be more like a discussion board or a journal entry.
Another question.
Sure.
So if we attend the Zoom meeting, we still have to comment on 2 other people's stuff, right?
Nope, you don't. Nope, you're done.
So just do the initial post.
That's right.
Okay.
All you have to do is
do
the initial post. So Bruna and Bianca, like you already went way above and beyond. I'll give you extra points, but like you went way above and beyond. You didn't have to reply to each other.
I know, I didn't know. It's okay.
You're so cute. So again, if you attend on Thursday, all you have to do is the initial post. So reply and responding to others, or join me for a Zoom at 10. No need to reply to others. You'll get 10 points just for showing up. Yeah. So there you go. You guys got it. Yeah, you're awesome. Thank you so much for joining me on a Zoom. I didn't know if people were going to be joining me or not. It's good to see your face.
Thank you, Professor.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you guys are, you're awesome.
Thanks.
Brianna, thank you so much. You've been such a great student. Zoe, you too. Bianca, Bruna, you've been lifesavers. This semester has been a hard one for all of us, I know, and you guys have been wonderful. So thank you. Thank you for making my life worthwhile. There you go. And Iana too. Ilana, did you talk at all, Ilana and Kelly?
Yeah, I did talk. I was the one, I said.
You, not Brianna, okay. Got it.
I was the one that was asking about the poem from Tessie's perspective. You called me Brianna, but that was Kelly.
I'm so sorry, Kelly. I only saw people on my little thing.
It's fine.
And Ilana, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, everything was practically said. I was just like taking everything in and how my interpretations kind of fit along with everyone else's. Sorry I didn't speak up that much. It's just what everyone else said was like practically what I was saying, and then more because I was just taking all the information in.
Good. Excellent. Well, your discussion boards have always been incredibly strong too. So, and same with yours, Pauline. You guys are awesome. All right, everybody take care of yourself. If you have any concerns, the test will be, the final test is supposed to be scheduled for next Tuesday, but as I'm going to tell people, you've got until Tuesday until basically Friday to do the test. So it's the same as the other test. It's just going to be on Middlesex. It's not over all 3 novels. It's just Middlesex. And basically it's going to look like The Color Purple, where I'm going to ask who's speaking into whom and where in the novel this takes place, which I know is kind of hard, but hopefully it'll be kind of clear. And then just do the analysis. So it'll be very much like that second test. And that's it. All right. So you'll have pretty much all finals week to try to figure that into your schedule. I'm going to try to make it as open as possible so you can take it when it fits in with your life, because I know it's tough to do that already. All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.